Greetings and welcome to the fourth episode of the RIMS Bermuda 2020 webinar series presented by RIMS and the Bermuda Business Development Agency. This session is titled Captives in the Current Market. This session will be hosted by Jasmine DeSilva, Business Development Manager of Risk and Insurance Solutions for the BDA, and she will be joined by an esteemed panel who will join and whom she will introduce shortly. I am Justin Smallison, Business Content Manager at RIMS, the Risk and Insurance Management Society. A few notes before we begin. If you have a question for our presenters during today's session, please submit them by writing in the question box, not the chat box. Feel free to ask at any point in the presentation. We will reserve time at the end for a Q&A. That Q&A will be moderated by Jasmine and moderator Grainne Richmond. Following this session, the recording will be available on OpusEd and Risk Knowledge, the RIMS online content library. All downloads and related contact information will be accessible to the sponsor. On to today's session. As the market transitions into a hardening cycle, insurance managers are increasingly turning to captives to help manage their risks. This session will discuss global trends in insurance rates, coverages, placement, and the role of captives, including the Bermuda solution. RIMS and the Bermuda Business Development Agency are thrilled to be joined by a large global audience. Welcome all. BDA Business Development Manager Jasmine DeSilva will introduce our panelists and begin the discussion.
Thank you, Justin. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you to the fourth episode of the RIMS Bermuda webinar series. In case you haven't joined us before, this series was developed by the BDA to put a spotlight on the key trends and issues currently shaping the risk management landscape and show how Bermuda is uniquely positioned to address them. This week, our focus is on the captive insurance market. Having formed the first captive in 1962, Bermuda remains the world's leading domicile and is home to a broad range of industries utilizing captives as a key risk management tool. Today, I'm excited because we have a stacked panel of experience and expertise. I want to introduce them all. Firstly, I'm going to introduce our moderator, Grainne Richmond. She's the Vice President at Dyna Management Services Limited. Grainne oversees a number of the company's captive and association group clients and is active in representing the industry. Next, we have Alison Dyer. She is the Managing Director of Ocorian's Bermuda office. Alison has an extensive experience and knowledge of Bermuda funds and investment services, private equity, and insurance industries. Next, we have David Gibbons. He is a partner at PwC Bermuda. David oversees the firm's dedicated captive insurance group and has more than 17 years of experience in the industry. Nicholas Miles, he is a partner in Kennedy's Bermuda office. He oversees and advises insurers and reinsures insurance intermediaries, policyholders, and investors on the insurance industry on a wide range of regulatory and corporate matters. Last but not least, we have Quinn. Brian is the Managing Director of Granite Management Limited. He has been an active member of the global insurance industry for over 30 years and was previously the Chief Underwriting Officer at General Motors Captive in Bermuda. So without further ado, I want to hand it over to Grainne so we can get this panel started.
Thank you so much, Jasmine, for that lovely introduction, and welcome everyone. Delighted you could join the Bermuda Captive team today for our discussion. As mentioned earlier, Bermuda is the birthplace of the captive concept, and throughout this session, we'll discuss Bermuda's resilience, relevance, and the flexibility of the Bermuda captive concept throughout. I'm sure, like everyone else calling in, you want to know, how has COVID-19 impacted on the captive space? And I'll throw that as the first question out to my panelists. How have you seen COVID-19 impact your captive space?
Thanks, Grainne. Thanks, Jasmine. Thanks, everyone. Good day. I think the answer to this one, unfortunately, like everything these days, is a little bit nuanced. If you look at captives in general as standalone insurance entities, they've weathered it well. The fact pattern has been good for them. They typically insure workers' comp, general liability, auto liability, and with increased activity means less claims. So their overall experience has been down. Where they write business interruption cover, it's typically adjoined to property cover. In the event of that property being destroyed, the business interruption kicks in. They don't tend to have business interruption cover for pandemics. So on the insurance side, they've been good. On the investment side, they've also been good. Typically, the investment strategy for most captives doesn't include equities, or if it does, it's a very marginal hold-in. So the fluctuations in the investment markets have not really affected them. However, captives aren't standalone insurance entities. They're part of a bigger whole, a bigger group. And they're obviously going to be affected as that group is affected, dependent on the various industries that captives come from. If we look back to 2008 to 2010 and that financial crisis, how did captives help? Well, in many cases, captives had large stores of cash because of the positive development that they built up for their cover over the years. And many companies pulled that cash out to use it in other ends of the operations to maintain them through tough times. Unfortunately, that cash is no longer there. Typically, what people have been doing through active management of their risk program is that captives have been writing more business, and they actually have become a much larger risk management tool within the overall framework. So the bad news is there's no surplus of cash to draw on. The good news is hopefully with the attention that was brought in 2008 and 2010, how to effectively use captives as a risk management tool in the overall framework, it has mitigated some of the risks and the negative outcomes from the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, that is very true. I'd be interesting to hear from Brian on how he's seen it, because he's in a very niche pool with his captive base.
Yeah, thanks, Grainne, and thanks, Jasmine, for the introduction. I concur with everything David said in terms of the impact and where we're going with the captives. But as Grainne said, Granite here, we work very closely on employee benefits. And I don't know whether it was good or bad. I've been dealing with COVID-19 since December last year, when it actually first started with some of our clients in China, and we were working on various things through that, and people using their captives to actually help them in dealing with the situation for their employees. So we've actually had a tremendously busy time as a result of COVID-19 over that period, implementing telehealth services for everything else, and people are using that for it. But I suppose the big thing I think panelists or attendees want to know is what has been the impact in captives who have employee benefits, and it's actually been largely a positive impact. From a life and disability basis, we all know that from the statistics that we see, COVID-19 generally affects the older populations in the world, and those are not typically the people who are active in your policies under plans. So it's actually had very little impact on mortality rates within the life and no impact on disability. Then for medical, it's had a very positive impact for two reasons. First reason is because of the global lockdowns that we've had, people are not going to the doctor. They're not choosing elective surgeries or elective treatments, and people aren't going to the GP as often as they would. And in actual fact, and this goes out in the US as well, medical trends, medical costs are going down by at least 50% globally through this pandemic on a month-to-month basis. And we're seeing that coming through. So it's been positive, and that has an ongoing impact that we have to look at as we come to rating those policies. And you'll have seen in places like the UK, where the insurers are giving rebates to the insureds on their medical plans. And in the captive industry, we've been doing the same, sort of to keep the employees happy where they're contributing to the programs. So it's had that positive impact. But going forward, there's going to be a bigger impact in terms of, I think people are looking at the captive and what can they use the captive to help them with dealing with this, and as it keeps on going. One other area that where it has impacted a little bit that I've seen from our own personal experience is actually on marine and transit risks, especially because things got stuck in storage for longer. So we've actually had a higher exposure and a higher claims incidents, especially around theft and damage to goods that were not being moved. And the global transit of stuff all got stopped, and it was stuck in things. And we're expecting some more to come through if that is in your captive. Yeah. So largely positive, but just some negatives. Sorry, Grainne.
No problem. You touch on a point there that I know is close to what Alison actually deals with as well, is that industry niche group. And Alison, I'd be interesting to know what your experience in COVID-19 through the different industry groups that your company deal with.
Yeah, sure. And it's very similar to what Brian and David have been saying, right? I mean, it is very dependent on the industry and a particular peril if the parent is involved in a particular industry. So we have a really broad breadth. We're not quite as niche as perhaps, Brian or David are. So, when we initially started seeing the effects of COVID, late last year, early this year, one of the things that we were concerned about was a propensity to move cash back up to the parent, right? So not seeing the captive as its own independent licensed entity. And we actually didn't see that, which was a very good thing. I think really proves the captive concept and proves an understanding by the sophisticated players that use the jurisdiction that the captive is its own licensed entity, despite contractually being subsidiary of the parent. There was a little bit of movement on the obvious spaces like airlines, that one could understand that commercially and even emotionally why a parent of an airline would be looking to shore up its balance sheet, particularly at the beginning of the cycle. But we didn't see, I thought was very interesting at the end of the day that was not happening across the entire book business.
Yeah, we've seen it here as well at Dyna that, really the resilience of the captive has really come through on COVID-19, but there is a future kind of outlook that we need to look to. Believe it or not, there was before COVID-19, and we had a captive industry, as Jasmine said, since 1962. But Nick, I'd be interested in hearing from you on, we'll leave COVID-19 aside, and that might come up in questions later. What did you see in the Bermuda captive space in 2019 and early 2020? Nick, are you with us? You might be still on mute.
Am I unmuted?
No, you're unmuted. We can hear you.
Okay, good. Sorry. I think there are three trends that I would comment on. 2019, we saw in Bermuda 22 captive registrants. Was a small uptick on the previous year. So there was definitely a sort of promising trajectory of increasing numbers. But the three trends I would mention are, well, one is relating to a particular coverage class that has been a hugely growing source of risk exposure for captives. And then two, uses of captives for new emerging risks. So the coverage class that's worth commenting on is cyber. We've all been persuaded, I'm sure, by insurers and intermediaries in the industry that there is an enormous coverage gap for cyber, and it's just growing year on year by a huge degree. There had already been a big uptick in use of captives for cyber. There's a recent figure reported by the Bermuda Monetary Authority, the BMA, who say they saw a 46% increase in premiums written related to cyber by captives in Bermuda between 2017 and 2018. And I've no doubt that that continued into 2019 and 2020 overall. In terms of these emerging risks that are worth mentioning, the first one is crypto assets. There may be an opportunity to expand on this a bit more later on, but Bermuda, as well as having a global reputation for insurance, has successfully developed a very strong reputation for the regulation of digital assets businesses as well, and that has seen Bermuda being chosen by some entities operating in the crypto asset area as the domicile of choice for their captive. It's reported that the growth of the crypto asset industry was really being hindered by a spectacular dearth of insurance coverage for that type of risk. And so it was no surprise when Gemini, a US cryptocurrency exchange, in the beginning of 2020, it formed their own captive in Bermuda, which reportedly will provide about $200 million of custodial liability coverage. So that's definitely a first in Bermuda. I think it's one of the first globally in terms of meaningful coverage for the crypto asset market. And then the other emerging risk, I guess, also where captives have seen a lot of changes is cannabis. Last year, the BMA made a notice to the industry clarifying its position on the insurance of cannabis businesses, effectively explaining that insurers need to make sure that the underlying business is carried on in compliance with all applicable laws in the jurisdictions of domicile of the business. But in principle, if that could be maintained, then there was no principal objection to you insuring those risks. And we've seen already one captive registration this year in Bermuda relating to a Canadian cannabis business.
Right, yeah, and I know there's been other jurisdictions that have looked into it. Nobody could quite get a comfort of it. Being a bit of a child myself, I do giggle every time I hear that we've got a cannabis captive, but I'm really proud of Bermuda for in some way leading the way on this in this, and it's hopefully that kind of leadership will stand to us going forward. David, are you seeing anything? You know, you've got the audit space, so you're seeing a lot of you'd be kind of hands-on in different areas. Are you seeing anything that we saw in that Nick hasn't covered in 2019? That was new?
I think more generally, Grainne, what we've seen, and I mean, I was receiving probably 2 to 3 calls a week in kind of February and March from either people that are looking to access the reinsurance market through captives that didn't have a captive before because of the hardening insurance and reinsurance market and pricing, which is only getting worse. And then the other thing is that as they were in the market already, they were looking to use their captive in various pieces throughout kind of the risk stack to negotiate pricing with reinsurers. And then finally, since we're going through a list of kind of why to form captive and how to use it, the other thing that they kept asking about was, I can't get this cover in the market, or it just doesn't make sense for me to pay market rates on this cover. Let me get this bespoke cover into my captive. So we were seeing that across the board. Most of the questions kind of with people that had existing captives already, and we're looking at the bespoke cover, were either US or global organizations that already had captives. In terms of access to the reinsurance market, a lot of questions out of Canada. Right. Canada isn't a traditional market that's used a lot of reinsurance in the past, but I think with the hardening insurance market there and kind of hardening reinsurance market as well, they really wanted to use a captive to go into the reinsurance market and help with some favorable pricing.
Yeah, we've seen that just recently, and I've actually got a client call later today on where I think sometimes we forget when we're talking about the expansion of a captive domicile and we focus on pure new captive numbers, you really need to look at the premium growth within those captives as well, because we're seeing where the SIR now is increased within our captives, so there's more premium flowing into the captives. So that, to me, that's growth. It's not just the number of registered captives, it is growth. Alison, what are you seeing in 2019 as the corporate secretary and the law firm in dealing with all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really happened is it's woken up an old industry, right? To piggyback on what Nick was saying, there's much more innovation and differing uses for a captive. I mean, you never wanted the concept to go stale, even though the concept is obviously well proven around for a long, long time. It's something that people are very comfortable with. You never want it to go stale, and as a jurisdiction, you never want that. So the innovation that you're seeing over the last year or two is incredible. And what it's causing people to do is, of course, look for different business models and different things, for sure, like cannabis and cyber, et cetera. But it's also causing people, not just parents, but managers, both onshore and offshore and other players in the market, to say, you know, what has my captive done for me lately? Like, what is the point of my captive? Can I make it more efficient? Can I make it more cost effective? Should I be looking at different investments? Should I be changing the way that I govern my captive? You know, what else can it do, given that the product is so relatively secure compared to other products in the market? So what we're sort of seeing is lots more use of changing investments, looking at different types of allocation. So am I too much in traditional, or should I be looking at the alt market? How am I changing that? On the governance side, it's, you know, I think the governance side is a product of not just the market, as David was saying, the hardening market, looking at people that are looking to use or to create their own captives. It's, you know, how do I go internally to my captive and sort out my risk and review my risk, looking internally rather than relying externally? And one of the easiest ways to do that, ways that we should do that, is around the governance protocol, right? So people are looking at their boards, at their committees of their boards, and saying, do I have the right mix of people on the board? Do I have too many lawyers? Although you could never have too many lawyers, obviously. Do I have too many lawyers? Do I have too many accountants? Do I need more risk people? You know, should I have more representation for the investment manager or the insurance manager on this? Just to create different innovative ways of using this product.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I think we're going to be touching on that actually even more towards the end of the session on how these future captives can change even further. I love your phrase, reawakening. I think that's so apt because it is a reawakening. I think sometimes people look at the captive space as that old tool that was in the toolbox, but it's coming to the top of the toolbox now for a lot of risk managers. So that's great to hear. You know, we've had some positive discussion, you know, across COVID-19 impact on captives, how Bermuda has coped over 2019 and early 2020. One of the biggest partners enabling to ensure that the captive industry stays going forward and also protects itself is the regulator. And Nick, I know you have a lot of interaction as a law firm with the regulator. How have you found this? How have you found the interaction with the regulation between innovation, new products, cannabis, and during COVID-19? I'd be interested to hear.
We haven't seen any material disruption to the responsiveness of the regulator, notwithstanding the lockdown that we've experienced in Bermuda. We still find that if the regulator is presented with a well-reasoned, comprehensive, and clearly thought out registration application, that they will still strive to abide by, if you like, the sort of unofficial pledge that if you get the application in on the Monday, you'll have a decision by the Friday of the same week. And if the decision is to approve registration, you'll have your certificate of registration within a few business days thereafter. But that really, what we have seen is perhaps some clients or heard on the grapevine of entities or applicants perhaps not always anticipating the issues that the regulator is going to have. For example, particularly if you're looking at a business plan which involves an emerging risk sector, such as crypto asset liability, no historic data really to go on, very difficult to evaluate. Just the area where you really need to make sure you have comprehensive professional advice to let you know what issues the BMA is going to be alive to, because it's those where, if something hasn't been anticipated, the BMA will send it back to you with a question, and people may be surprised that they're being asked, well, what reinsurance program proposals do you have? And things like that, which really just it emphasizes the need to ensure that you have had good professional advice in preparing the proposal. Fortunately, there is plenty of expert professional advice among law firms, insurance managers, brokers, and corporate service providers on the island.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's a team-based approach between all those providers. And I know, Alison, you're very heavily involved in those applications as well.
Yeah, it was interesting when the first effects of COVID started to move towards this side of the world. We had calls from a lot of clients saying, look, how sophisticated is your regulator? How is your regulator going to be able to deal with this? There was regulators in other very sophisticated jurisdictions that were having their own challenges getting documents provided to them, being able to turn around time. I have to completely echo what Nick was saying. There is no substantive change in how the BMA is able to turn around applications, as long as, frankly, they are well reasoned, put together, and you give them the courtesy of discussing it with them. They're very good. And we deal with regulators in a lot of jurisdictions, and I think the BMA is one of those where they are very willing to discuss things with you. The level of expertise that resides, particularly in the insurance space, is really exceptional. The Solvency II equivalency, all those sorts of accolades or standards really that the BMA has attained through its tenure, I think is just indicative of that. So it is very easy to deal with them. They're very open to having discussions, which I have to say, as a lawyer is a very encouraging sign that you can actually give people a call. And it doesn't really matter who you need to talk to, whether it be on the application side, whether it be on the authorization side. Even Jeremy himself, the CEO, if you need something conceptually to discuss, very willing to put together a panel to go through. So I have to say, I think the BMA is probably ahead in that its electronic platform is quite so sophisticated. And the insurance market in particular is so well placed to deal with such an electronic platform that they were a little more able to deal with the relative business interruptions that COVID was presenting, right? Like you don't have to go to the regulator, where some of the things like illegal stealing, et cetera, you can't do that electronically, whereas the BMA was already set up for that. And then they clearly anticipated some sort of level of business interruption or business continuity planning within their structure. So no, it's very good.
Yeah, I've always viewed the relationship with the BMA like a parent-child relationship. You may not always be happy with the questions they come back with, but you have to answer them, and they've got a job to do. And I think it's up to our job as the Bermuda professionals is to ensure that we've properly talked to the potential new clients setting up their captive or changing their captive in their license, to ensure that they're prepared, that it's not just a rubber stamp approach here in Bermuda. It's very much, they've got a reputation to protect, and at the end of the day, they're trying to protect you, the policyholder. So that's very, very important. Let's sidestep a bit, because the other item that, you know, people may not think really impacts the captive space, but we're certainly seeing it now with filings, is economic substance. And I know, Alison, you've been heavily involved on the steering committee throughout 2018 and 19 on economic substance. And how do you think Bermuda is meeting that right now? And what's our requirements? And, you know, for those risk managers out there that would be setting up a captive for their client, so to speak, what comfort can we give them on Bermuda and economic substance?
Yeah, so substance has been probably one of the biggest legislative and policy changes in jurisdiction and frankly within region for some time. I think, you know, it is one of the biggest, along with beneficial ownership, which didn't impact insurance so much, but it is one of those kind of sea changes, right? And the kind of interesting thing about it is that it sort of morphed two concepts that don't necessarily go together. So you have this tax concept, very clear tax, you know, policy, political perspective from onshore, being sort of pushed into a tax neutral jurisdiction and tax neutral region, really, into sort of that corporate space. So it was extremely challenging to balance those two aspects, and very challenging for, you know, the government administration when they're trying to meet their international obligations, which they should and they must, but also balancing as to what the jurisdictions need and how the jurisdiction continues to grow at the end of the day whilst adhering to those international concepts and requirements. And to be honest with you, I think they did a really good job. I mean, it's not going to be perfect. I don't think anybody would say that, you know, this is a perfect solution. It is, however, one where I think demonstrates the strength of collaboration between the present government administration, particularly the Ministry of Finance and the Registrar of Companies, that worked very closely with the steering committee that was established. And what was good about the steering committee, and I think very good as perspective, was that they looked across the whole jurisdiction. You know, sometimes people get myopically focused on one industry or another, but in this case, because of the broad breadth of impact or potential impact of substance, for all entities within, relevant entities within scope, it really needed that broad brush and broad view and perspective to bring to bear on the regulation. And I think that was done very, very well. You know, I would also, to be honest, commend the Registrar of Companies. It is the first time really that they've become a regulator of such significance, having to deal with so much data. And at the end of the day, this is, because it's a tax concept, highly data driven, and it's specific data driven. And they had to create an e-portal in a very limited space of time, create it, get people on it, you know, have the sufficient bandwidth, all those things that you do when you create something operational, particularly operational platform that they then have to pull from to report back. And I think it was done as well as it could have been. You know, I think on the insurance side, insurance is well placed. They are well placed generally, and particularly the captives, because they just kind of embrace this concept of having data within jurisdiction. Not a lot in its purest sense is outsourced. Much more of it is done here, and that's particularly true for mine and management. Board meetings, I mean, everybody knows AGM seasons where nobody sleeps, nobody goes anywhere, everybody does, you know, all the AGMs and the board meetings around those AGMs in jurisdiction, legitimately here with Bermuda residents on those boards. So I think the insurance space is well placed to deal with that. The other aspect of it is insurance is used to providing data to a regulator. I mean, they're providing data to the BMA through their portal for many years. And that's not the same for other industries within jurisdiction, within region, right? Particularly the non-regulated industries. I mean, holding companies, any other entity like that. That's just not something that people have ever had to do. Even as something as simple as having financial statements in jurisdiction. There, it's been a requirement of the Companies Act for some time, but in the insurance sector, you know you have to have it. You have to provide it to the regulator. It sits with your insurance manager. Normally, they're providing that concept within jurisdiction, whereas others don't. So insurance, frankly, is well placed to deal. Some of the themes that have come out of this is the need to have your mind and management really in Bermuda, and obviously your CEGR, your core income generating activities, need to be within jurisdiction. That is done more easily done with the insurance sector than I would say for other sectors, which don't have the massive human capital expertise within jurisdiction to deal with that. But it's really flagged up things like when you do your minutes, make sure they actually demonstrate what was discussed at the time. Everybody knows we have a lot of board meetings here, but your minutes really should reflect what was discussed. They shouldn't be cookie cutter, so-and-so turned up, so-and-so did this, and then the end of the meeting. It really should demonstrate what was discussed at the time, because there is the expertise sitting around the table, particularly in the insurance space, that provides that. Other key themes: have your service provider, whoever it is, your insurance manager or your CSP, prepare your board packs for you. Have them, if the chairman is here, the chairman is, or the CSP or the insurance manager is sending out those board packs from Bermuda. So it just adds to the commentary that the captive or the insurance or whatever entity is within scope is actually sitting in Bermuda.
We certainly, as an insurance manager, very much encourage any service provider that is in Bermuda and the meeting's being held in Bermuda to come to the meeting. So that's between the auditors, the CSPs, down to the actuary, any advisor that's here in Bermuda. We certainly encourage them, and I know a lot of the other insurance managers do. Just to remind folks that and apologies, Alison, if you did say it, we're in the middle of our filings at the moment, and those with a December year end have to the end of June. My advice to any, and I'm sure Brian would agree with me as an insurance manager, we're getting a lot of queries from clients on what they need to do, and it is taking a lot of coordination between insurance managers and the corporate secretarial firms, because they hold a lot of the data that needs to be going into these firms. And so my advice to people out there is, make sure you do contact your Bermuda professional in relation to filing your Bermuda economic substance form. That's extremely important. We've discussed COVID-19, thinking, is that going to, knock the captive industry off its legs? Economic substance, it impacts, but it tells a positive story. So what is the challenge facing the captive industry out there? And David and Brian, if either one of you want to kick this off, because you're seeing it from both sides.
Yeah, Brian, if you don't mind, I'll start off. I think access to talent. I think many professions at the moment are fighting or vying for the future intelligent young professionals. There's so many options for young people these days, and it's important that we get the talent in. If you articulate what a career in captives is, the fact that you get to see an insurance company run all aspects of it, underwriting, reinsurance, loss reserves, investments, you get to see it from start to finish, you get to understand it. Further, the risk management and risk mitigation portions of running a captive in an overall risk strategy, and the fact that risk managers and CROs have increasingly larger voices around the board table, around the leadership table, it becomes a compelling prospect, right? It's a career that should be fulfilling and give you a lot of advancement. The question is, why aren't young people going into it? I think it's a lack of awareness. We're seeing some universities such as Butler have captive programs actually to increase awareness, but I think it's up to all of us as captive professionals to become mentors of young people, make them aware of what the opportunities are in this profession. And it goes without saying that diversity drives better results. And when we're looking to mentor young people, I think it's important that we bring people into the profession that not only think different to us, but look different to us. Let's have a captive professional panel like this that represents all aspects of society, understands the risks, and thus can insure them.
Yeah, thanks, David. You stole most of my comments there. I think it was I agree with you on everything on diversity. Youth is, I think you and I and Grainne have talked about this for years, that we need more people to come in, and I know we've all tried very hard, and we continue to try, and Bermuda is doing actually a very good job But we're not just talking about here, it's on a global basis. Youth needs to come into this, and diversity into the insurance industry to help us move forward and where we're going. I think one of the other challenges that we're going to see now, and I think it goes back to question number 2 that we talked about earlier on, the second question about new opportunities. And there are a lot of new opportunities. I'm seeing our clients are looking to bring new programs into their captives. They're extending because of the hardening market. They're looking to extend what they already have in there. And that was pre-COVID, they were doing that. And now during COVID, either they're more focused or they had too much time sitting at home. They're really thinking about it. And there's a lot of innovation coming through. But a big issue that I see coming out of that is the ability for the captives to buy protections over that, because the reinsurance market is hardening quite a lot. And I think COVID-19 is going to have an impact there. And I think that hardening market will, like a captive does have to have that backup protection behind it to support it. So those are some of the challenges I see coming forward. But I think we can deal with those very easily. And the encouraging news here in Bermuda is we've heard rumors of new startups coming in, and Bermuda, as usual, is taking sort of lead in those startups. Rumor. I have no hard facts, but this is encouraging because those markets coming in will help alleviate that. That's where we.
Yeah, I agree that there is a lack of young talent here, and I'm going to ask Alison to pipe up on this as the other woman on the panel, how she sees diversity across boards, and how we can change that.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, captives are an old industry, right? And there is a perception, rightly or wrongly, that there is no diversity within it, because if something is that old, there's an inherent kind of sticking to one layer, sticking to one perspective. And I think the inability historically to bring young people, whether that be people of color, whether it be, people of different ethnic backgrounds, or it doesn't really make a difference what we mean by diversity. It's just critical that is really baked in, and it can't just be lip service. You hear a lot of people talk, and not on this panel, but generally about, we need to be, we need more diversity, we need more women, we need more ESG, we need more focus on that, but nothing happens, right? I mean, I think and it's not unique to captives. You can see that globally, what's going on, with people being more focused on the need for different perspectives and to respect other people's perspectives, such that those perspectives get brought to the board table, to the management table, to the senior leadership table. And all that does is pull other people in of different views and different perspectives. All it takes is a few people to do it, and people will start seeing how important it is to bring that. It's a risk mitigation tool at the end of the day. I mean, fundamentally, if you only have one perspective at a table, be it whatever their perspective is, you're never going to be able to see the risks.
Yeah.
It's just a fundamental and factual impossibility. The more people you have looking through different lenses that are able to identify things that I wouldn't see or somebody wouldn't see, but then come up with innovative solutions, right? So if we're going to move the captive industry forward and meet the challenges of of the go forward basis, whatever that market looks like, it's just critical that we have different thinkers and different types of views at the table.
Yeah, I agree. It's amazing that this is something that's within our control. COVID-19 is so outside of our control, and here's something that's within our control to change. And so I really encourage everybody to do that. Nick, what do you see outside of diversity and bringing youth into the programs?
Yeah, I mean, this comment comes a little bit out of left field, given what's gone before, but one observation I would make is the effect of social inflation, what's called social inflation. This isn't something which is unique to captives. It's the commercial insurance sector are exposed as well. But with the increase of pressure on companies in recent years to demonstrate corporate social responsibility, pressures from investors, media, this is having a knock-on effect ultimately on the size of exposure and the size of settlements and the frequency of settlements. In some classes of business, management liability, employers' practices liability. It, as I said, affects commercials as well as captives, but that by no means reduces the significance to captives. Equally, for example, in some US states have taken the initiative to increase minimum wage amounts. That's having a knock-on effect on the size of EPL settlements. That's one example of many, but yeah, it's a broad phenomenon, but it has an undoubted effect on captives, I think, too.
I think what I hear is anything that could impact insurance globally will have a knock-on effect on the captive space. So, you know, does the captive industry have a growth future in Bermuda? And I'll throw that open to the whole panel. Whoever puts their hand up first on my photo gets to answer first. So does Bermuda have a future? Brian, you were quick.
Absolutely. You know, I think, you know, Bermuda's flexibility has always been our strong point here, and our ability to adapt to globally and the access to markets here. And, you know, I've seen it, I talked about it earlier on, all my clients are looking to expand their captive capabilities, look at new uses for the captive, and we're always trying to innovate here. You know, the BMA's recent Sandbox initiative is a great example of that. We're trying to do that. We're creating ILS structures. So, you know, I do think it's bright. You know, will we grow the number of captives here? Probably will be stable, but I think that, as you said earlier on, Grainne, the real thing here is actually the premium growth going through the captive, and the complexity of the captives that are here really are our selling point of what we do well. And I see that continuing with the base that are here, because the clients who have captives in Bermuda are very loyal to here because they know the flexibility, they know how well it works, would be my opinion.
Anyone? Alison, Nick?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think now is the right environment, right? The right petri dish for captives to grow further. I mean, just the hardening market itself. I mean, lots of more sophisticated players are coming and asking questions. So I can't get coverage for this layer of risk, or it's too expensive, or whatever it happens to be. What should I do? And it's like, well, create a captive. That's what they're sort of there for, or what they are. And frankly, as we were saying earlier, it's a well-proven concept, particularly in this current environment, that people should be starting to use.
Nick, did you have...
Yes, I would definitely agree with both of those comments, or the comments of both of those contributors. To me, one of the big drivers for Bermuda going forward is going to be its proven expertise in the world of digital assets and innovative uses of technology. You know, because yes, the Bermuda Monetary Authority and the jurisdiction has a global reputation for insurance regulation, but it's now developed a strong reputation for the regulation of digital assets businesses, excuse me. And we have what's called the regulatory sandbox created by the Bermuda Monetary Authority, being a kind of safe environment in which insurers, including captives, can trial experimental uses of technology in the way they carry on business, in a slightly more closely monitored environment with a kind of provisional license, if you like, until they get to the point where they can demonstrate proof of concept and graduate to a full-blown permanent license. But I think the fact that we've got that combination now, it really puts us in a good place to win, to see formations of captives which are looking to make an innovative use of technology, looking to cover emerging risks, most notably crypto. And again, you mentioned a minute ago, what happens in the commercial industry often trickles down into the captive industry. In the last couple of weeks, or maybe a couple of months, we've seen 2 commercial formations in Bermuda, which demonstrate why Bermuda's reputation in those areas is so significant. We've had one small commercial insurer, Evertas, which is dedicated to insuring liability in the crypto asset sector. And we've got another one formed as a dual license holder, innovative general business insurer and digital assets business, which is called Names Ecosystems. And the proposal, the business plan there is to use digital assets as a form of collateral, for insurance risk. So, you know, I see, depending on how those pan out, those sorts of examples being reused in the captive sector.
Yeah, I think throughout this whole discussion, and you know, when we were meeting beforehand, it's very clear to me that captives are still very much relevant. And as Alison said, there's certainly been a reawakening through COVID-19 and the hardening of the reinsurance marketplace. I think to ensure that we do remain relevant, We need to ensure that we remain flexible and collaborate with each other. And I certainly can see that happening. We need to remind ourselves that there is so much opportunity in the captive space, especially given the different types of industries that we all closely work with here in Bermuda, between the commercial insurance, the captive space, the ILS space, the life space, the fund space, the trust space, the bank space, the asset management space. I could keep going on, but I'll stop there. But again, it's what I've felt throughout this whole discussion has been very positive. We do have our issues, but we certainly have the expertise and the collaboration to get through those issues. At this stage, Jasmine, I was actually going to pause and see if we have any questions from our audience.
My apologies. Just have to get myself unmuted. We have a few questions, and I think I'll direct them. And Grainne, you can turn into a panelist at this point, given your expertise. You discussed the BMA and how they've been very flexible during this period. And so I really wanted to point out any additional reporting requirements that have been required from the BMA at this time, Grainne.
Yeah, I'll start off because we're the ones that actually submit that button, but the auditors are very much heavily involved as well. So I'll ask David to chime in. There have been additional requirements requested by the BMA, especially as COVID-19 has come in. But outside of COVID-19, they're asking for additional matters on outsourcing, schedules of alternative capital, and then addressing your SARS reporting for, AML, which is anti-money laundering, and anti-terrorism financing requirements. So there is a lot more requirements. Overall, are our clients concerned about extra reporting? No, they prefer to be in a properly regulated jurisdiction. But I'll pass on to David because they're very much heavily involved in the extra note disclosures and requirements that's required over COVID-19.
Sure. From a regulatory perspective, and Bermuda is a world-recognized regulator. It's one of the reasons why people form commercial companies and captive companies here. You probably expect 2 parts prudence and 1 part flexibility. And I think this is effectively what the BMA have done. They've given flexibility and they gave everyone an election to file 1 month earlier than the required deadlines. A free election. If you need an extra month because people were working remotely to get the information through, you have that extra month. In terms of prudency, they've effectively done 2 things. They've taken a sample of captive insurers and they've basically done a deeper dive to understand the problems that their group are going through as a result of COVID-19, understand the impacts of those problems on the captive and how it would impact their liquidity and solvency. Completely expected of a regulator. The other thing they've asked is part of the filing for this year that there include a subsequent event disclosure note in every statutory filing that highlights what management has done to evaluate where the captive stands, where the group stands, and the impact it has, not just as at December 31st year end, but as at the date of the filing, which in most cases is going to be June 30th. So yet again, 2 parts prudency, 1 part flexibility, and all our clients have responded well to it. This is what you would expect from an internationally recognized regulator.
Thank you, David. And yeah, we can't hone in enough about how great the BMA is and how they are just pertinent to the success of the jurisdiction. Well done for the discussion on diversity. I think that's a critical subject. I'm really happy that you guys tackled that head on. Can we speak to any sort of, and kind of mirror that with the discussion on needing more talent within the industry and sourcing that talent? Can we speak on any intentional recruitment ventures that are happening in this space that your kind of companies can speak to? Alison, I see you unmuted yourself, so I'm going to pass it to you. I can read the room even virtually.
Yeah, so for us, we have actually been talking to various insurance and managers, included Marsh, Aon, to try to do a more collaborative effort to address particularly Bermudian students when it comes to people that are either at the Bermuda College or they're at some of the schools in jurisdiction, and even those people that are studying abroad, particularly in the UK, to make sure that they understand sort of what captives are, or basically what Bermuda does as it relates to captives in the insurance market, to ensure that they are always educated as to expectations really around, what you should be doing to make sure that you put yourself in the best position to get interviewed, the best position to, to be hired, to know the right people. We set up one-on-ones with students that particularly will come to us and say, what should I be doing to further my chances within industry? So it's something that we are very globally aware of, and something that we are particularly interested in partnering even more closely with the insurance managers, given that everybody's kind of web is a little bit different, to make sure that Bermudian students are given that opportunity.
Absolutely. Brian, did you want to speak on this?
Yeah, no, just similar to you. We're much smaller companies than Ocorian or the others here, but we're doing the same. We're always looking, especially here in Bermuda, can we recruit more people in to train them in there? And it is a goal of ours, not just for diversity and inclusion, but to follow on from what we said earlier on about we want more youth in the industry. It's something I passionately believe in. I joined this industry when I was far too young and never left. It was my prison sentence, but I want other people to enjoy that internment.
Absolutely. I think it's key to discuss. It's the education and access is the first stop. When we need to know about the industry in order to be interested about it. So I think that's a key discussion. Grainne, you wanted to discuss?
I actually see David is chomping at the bit there.
Oh, I'm sorry, David. I can't see you. So go ahead, David.
That's fine. I was well read, Grainne. This is obviously a very key topic to me. Over the last 7 years, PwC has brought through 100 people, 100 Bermudians through our Head Start program. Considering we employ 205 people overall, that's a significant number. I think the big thing that we did in terms of our kind of change in approach was we stopped looking for accountants. We stopped looking for accounting majors, business majors. We just started looking for bright kids that wanted to learn. And you know what? Not all of them stick. Some of them do it and don't really like it and they move on, but some of them do. Biology majors, philosophy majors, sociology majors make great insurance professionals. And I think that that's what you really need to look at. You need to spend time talking to these kids outside the interview room, sit down, have a drink with them, just talk through kind of what their interests are, what they want to do, and talk about what the opportunity is and give them a chance.
Yeah, I agree with Brian.
Can I just add to that, the best, in a prior life, the best graduate intern I ever had, and she's done very well through her career now at 20 plus years, was back in London, and she had a major in Greek mythology. It was perfect for insurance.
Absolutely. Grainne, you can go ahead.
Just to close off on that, it's not just a Bermuda issue, this captive talent, and I think it's requirement of all the captive jurisdictions, whether it be Cayman, Bermuda, Vermont, or Guernsey. We need to work with the universities and the schools globally on that. Like Bermuda has a great relationship with Butler University, who have a captive here, so that's a great story. But it's getting into those universities as well, of educating them on insurance and the captive space. So, and again, the partnership with the BDA and RIMS, I'm sure we'll get some extra exposure that we may have not received to date on, especially the captive space. The commercial space, the big, as we call them, the big boys, they get a lot of recognition, a lot of news coverage, but the captive space is such a nice place to have a career in that that's quite important.
No, absolutely, and thank you for the BDA plug, Grainne. We ourselves host Butler University and other universities. They come to our office, and we are able to kind of give a broad brush of what we do at the BDA and our industries. So I honestly think this was the best way to kind of wrap it up. We're coming to a close now, but this discussion has been great. You all have really hit home on some key issues that we need to discuss as a result of the jurisdiction and for captives. Grainne, do you have anything you want to say just to close out, or?
No, just for any risk manager out there who has a question or a follow-up question, I think, all the panelists here are very much open to having further discussions, and I believe all our contact details, if they're not on the flyer, they're certainly on our company websites.
Yeah.
But thank you to the BDA and to RIMS for hosting this and for allowing us to be part of this panel.
No, thank you all. I know everyone's busy. It's a busy time of the year, so I am grateful for all of your expertise. And as Grainne, I would just copy what she says. If you have any questions concerning captives or doing business in Bermuda, please contact myself. I can also get the questions to all of the panelists and put you in contact with them. Thank you for your time. We have one more webinar left in this 5-part series. It is next week, July 1st, on InsurTech and Innovation. So I would really welcome you all to join us for that webinar. But thank you for joining us today. And Justin, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you again, Jasmine. A copy of this webinar will be archived on Risk Knowledge on Opus Ed within a few business days. The RIMS Bermuda 2020 webinar series concludes July 1st, as you were saying, at 12 p.m. Eastern with the session InsurTech and Innovation. Guess what? Our own Jasmine DeSilva will moderate that one. We're very excited. Visit rims.org to register for that session. We look forward to seeing you July 1st. Thank you all and stay safe.